For this first video in this lesson, we're going to take a look at an extremely simple C# application that displays the line of text, "Welcome to C# programming," in a command prompt window. And for the purpose of this example, what we're going to do in this video is study the source code of the program, show it to you executing, and then in the next video we'll go ahead and build this simple program from scratch so I can show you a couple of additional IDE features that come in handy as you develop source code. So the example itself is in the Figure 3.1 folder. The figure numbers are based on our book C# 2012 for programmers. The name of the first app is Welcome 1, and I'm going to open its solution file to load this into the IDE. Now you can see that it's loaded up my project, and if I expand my project's node, you'll see within it there is a file called welcome1.cs, and that contains the source code for this app. Now before we study the source code, I'm going to go ahead and execute the application for you. And to do that, I'm going to select Debug, Start Without Debugging, and what that's going to allow me to do is see the program output, Welcome to C# Programming, without the window immediately disappearing from the screen. The text, "Press any key to continue ... was actually displayed by the IDE itself as a note to me that says I can dismiss this window just by touching any key on the keyboard. Now if I run this same program using Start Debugging, or by clicking the Start button, or by pressing the F5 key, what's going to happen is the output will be displayed only very briefly and the window will immediately disappear. So I'm going to go ahead and click the Start button and watch what happens. You'll see a window with a black background flash quickly on the screen and go away. Now obviously you don't have enough time to study the output when that happens. When you're building console applications, as we will do in the next many lessons for teaching you the fundamentals of C# development, you need to run the programs using either Start Without Debugging or in debug mode, but where you have a breakpoint set so that you can control when the program actually terminates. So for example, I could I click in the margin indicator bar, this gray bar here at the left edge of the editor window, and if I wanted to get into debug mode and use the debugging tools, I can set a breakpoint by clicking, and then the program will execute to that point and then allow you to control the execution from that point forward. And you can toggle breakpoints on and off simply by clicking in that margin indicator bar. Now at this point, what we want to do is take a look at the actual source code that you see on the screen. And even though this is just a little 12-line program that you see here, there are a whole bunch of different features that we need to talk about. Now the first and simplest feature are the two comments at line 1 and 2. The double / character is an indication of what we call an end-of-line comment or a single-line comment. Everything to the right of these characters is comment text that is ignored by the compiler. And as you can see, I've used comments here on line 7 and also at the ends of line 11 and 12 as well to comment what the purpose of each of the closing curly braces is. That comment style is also available to you in C as of the latest C standard, in C++, in Java, in Objective-C as well. Now at line 3 we have what's known as a using directive, and a using directive is telling the compiler that we're taking advantage of features of some portion of the .NET standard libraries, or the .NET framework, if you will. The system namespace, as it's called, contains many commonly used classes. One of them is the console class, which is used to do text output to a command line or to read input from the command line. Another one is the string class, and the string class actually starts with a capital S, but the string keyword in C# is actually another way to represent the class name string as well. When you're building C# applications, you build them by using various classes that you define, such as the class Welcome1 that we're about to take a look at, and classes that are provided by the .NET frameworks, as well as other forms of types that the .NET framework provides as well, and we'll talk about various other ones throughout these live lessons videos. Every single program you create will consist of at least one class definition. And typically, classes have capital first letters. So our class Welcome1 has a capital first letter. Console has a capital first letter. The word string is actually a keyword, and keywords are all lowercase letters. But again, the C# keyword string corresponds to the .NET framework class named string, and both the string class and the console class are part of the system namespace. You cannot use a class from the .NET framework without first indicating that you're going to use it, and there's two ways to do that. One is with a using directive saying I'm using features that are defined as part of this namespace. The other thing I can do is fully qualify the names. So for example, I could type here system.console, and that is a fully qualified class name that's being used, in which case I would not need line 3 in this program. So let me go ahead and get rid of that to get back to the original source code. So it will be common to see one or more using directives at the beginning of a given file in C#, and by default C# uses the file name extension .cs for C#. So we named our file welcome1.cs because it contains the class called welcome1. That is not a requirement as it is, for example, in the Java programming language, but it is a commonly used idiom to name the file based on the class that's defined within the file. Now, as I mentioned, every program you create will consist of at least one class definition. In our case, it's a class that we're calling Welcome1, and you get to choose your class names. By convention, class names start with a capital first letter, and if you have multiple words in a class name, each subsequent word is typically capitalized as well. In most of the classes that you create, they will start with the keyword public followed by the keyword class. We'll talk about public in a lot more detail in the next lesson. However, we'll just ask you to mimic that for the moment. Every class begins with the keyword class followed by the class's name, which is any valid identifier, but again, convention says capital first letter and capitalize each additional word in the class name. Identifiers cannot start with numbers, for example, and they can only contain a couple of special symbols such as the underscore character. If you stick with letters and numbers and only start with a letter, then you'll be in good shape. Now, class definition is delimited by a set of curly braces. In our case, the opening left curly brace at line 6 and the closing right curly brace at line 12. For those of you who might be coming from Java, this should look similar to what you see in Java, similar to C++ as well, but in C++ a class definition has to be followed by a semicolon, whereas in C# and Java it does not. Now, every class you create is typically going to consist of one or more methods and possibly some data as well. For these first couple of examples, the only method that we're going to encounter inside of our class is a very special method named main with a capital M. Main must receive as its argument a string array. That's the purpose of the square brackets. You can call it whatever you want, but args is the normal name. This actually represents command line arguments. So if you were to open a command prompt, type the name of an application that you want to run, and then follow it with arguments that should be sent into the program, those would get stored automatically for you in this string array. Now, by definition, the main method, which is going to launch the application and start it executing, must be a method with the capital M main, must have a string array as its parameter list, must return void, meaning it doesn't return any data, and it also must be a static method of the class. Now, we'll talk about static methods in detail in later lessons, but basically a static method of a class is special in that it's always available as soon as, I should say, the class is loaded into memory for execution. So when you go and execute a .NET app, especially a console app, the first thing it does is it goes and locates the main method in the class that's used to start up the application, and then that controls the launching of the application. So you must declare it static, and we'll talk about all the details of static and the public keyword that you see in lines 5 and 8 in much more detail later on once we get some additional programming under our belts. Now, within the main method, you have a body, which is delimited once again by required curly braces. Same thing for the class, delimited by required curly braces. Notice that the method and its comment that leads into it are indented one level within the class. That's a convention. In general, you want to indent the members that belong to a given class so you know that they're part of the class. It also makes the code a little more readable. And this particular method contains only one statement, a console.writeLine statement. The class called console contains a method named writeLine that is capable of taking the text you specify, in this case, welcome to C# programming, delimited by double quote characters. This is a string in C#. It's capable of taking that text and displaying it to the standard output, which by default is a command prompt window. Now, it turns out that writeLine is a static method of class console. So I don't, for those of you who are familiar with object-oriented programming, I don't need to create a console object to be able to call its writeLine method. This is basically a utility method that's always available to us. All we need to do to call it is to say, console class, use your writeLine method to display the text that I've specified in parentheses here. And all statements in C# of this form are going to end in a semicolon. So at this point, we've looked at all the different syntax within this program, and you've already seen it working. Notice that there's a number of keywords that are appearing in this code. Each of them shows up in the IDE in a dark blue text, so using, public, class, public static void, and string. Those are all keywords of the language. And in fact, there are many keywords in the language. Let me just bring up a table here for a moment. So these are all the keywords that you want to avoid using for identifier names. As you can see, there's quite a number of them here. And if I scroll down a little bit more, there's also what we call contextual keywords. These are keywords only in certain contexts within your code, but because they are sometimes used as keywords depending on the type of code you're writing, you should also avoid using these keywords as well as identifiers in your code. So all of those keywords are certainly in the online documentation, and of course you can also pause this video and study the keywords here if you'd like as well. So we've now taken a look at our first simple class definition in C#. We talked about all the different syntax features. In the next video, what we want to do is build this simple little example from scratch.